Audition has three analytical tools, and we're going to take a look at all three in this tutorial. I think you're going to find this exercise interesting, but you'll probably agree that these tools don't really have much of a practical purpose. To follow along, go get these two files here, the A440 organ chords out of phase file and the singer wave file there. There you go. I want to put those three analytical tools into one floating panel. So here's how we do that. We go Window, Amplitude Statistics, that's the first of the three. And it arrives on the scene here in its own floating panel. That's just the way the Adobe engineers decided to have this guy pop on the stage rather than bring it into a frame over here, for example. So we'll get the next one of the three, the second one, frequency analysis, and that too arrives in its own floating panel. We can put these two guys into one panel by grabbing this grabber handle here and dragging it into the frame or into this floating panel where you get the rectangle in the middle, and that drops it right in. So you have two guys in one now. And finally, let's get the phase meter, which shows up right down here, this tiny thing. I'll drag that inside there as well. Now we've got three guys in one floating panel. We're going to take a look at the phase meter first. Now I talked about the phase meter before when I talked about the graphic phase shifter effect, so I'll just review that. What the phase meter does is that it doesn't really measure phase, it measures correlation. How do these two channels, or in a surround sound mix, how do all those channels correlate? How do the peaks and valleys line up? And they line up in time, and if they're out of whack in terms of time, then that really is a phase shift. But it also measures whether one of the channels might be inverted. Inverted is another word for polarity shift, and that can happen. The most frequent thing is a phase shift where, let's say, microphones are placed far apart or tape heads are out of alignment if you still use tape. As far as an inversion or polarity shift, that's pretty rare, but it might happen with wiring problems. Nevertheless, this will show that something is not right, but let's just take a look and see just what it tells us. If the line ends up over here on the right, that means that it's good, that the correlation is good. And if it's over here in the yellow or the red, that means the correlation is not so good. Let's try it out here. We'll put it right there and let go. So way off. It's definitely not correlating well. It might be called the correlation meter. That'd be probably better, but at any rate, it's out of correlation. So that's all it tells you. It tells you, something's wrong here, but it doesn't tell you exactly what's wrong or how to fix it. And that's kind of where things kind of fall off a cliff. So now what do we do? Well, it comes down to making a closer examination if you want to give it a try. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to right click and drag there to zoom in to take a look at the waveform. And I want to look here at the higher end of the waveform where it's going to be more obvious what's going on here. I'll zoom in some more. And there you can start seeing the peaks and the valleys. I'll zoom in some more on these tall peaks here. And right off the bat, I think you can start noticing that something is awry. Here's this peak goes down, and here's that exact same peak going up. You can see that little boom boom little guy there. This one goes down where that one goes up. So this tells you that this one on the bottom, or that one on the top for that matter, one of them is inverted. And so that is an issue to be dealt with. They're also out of time. There is a phase shift here where this peak would be if it were inverted. It's a little bit off timing wise. So we're going to fix both of them and see what the phase meter does when we fix them. So the first order of business is to put this channel here in proper order by inverting it. So I'll just click on it to make it the active channel. I've got context sensitive channel editing here turned on in my preferences. If I didn't have that, I could just turn this guy off and get the same thing. Then I go Effects, Invert. And that'll flip that bottom channel, that right channel. Take a look at it. When I click it, you'll see it just flip over. There we go. So now we see this peak and that peak, and those are the guys that are not aligned. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and we'll just kind of get a closer look at those two guys. So there are those two guys, and they're out of alignment. So the way you fix that is by going to Effects, Noise Reduction Restoration, and going to the Automatic Phase Correction effect. The automatic phase correction effect, if you set the default settings, you can have auto align channels on. And that really is your fallback. That's your best bet when you use this effect. Let it do the heavy lifting for you. So I'm going to see if it can take this peak and slide it over and line it up with that peak. So I'll just say apply, and boom, it did it. Look at that, lined it right up. And so that is a good thing. Let me undo that though and show you the manual method. I'll press Control or Command Z. I'm going to just select this area just so we can see what we're talking about here. Go back to that effect, click on the automatic phase correction. I'm going to turn off the auto align now. and go to global time shift. And by the way, if I click global time shift, that does not automatically turn off this auto line. It should, because if you're doing global time shift, that's a manual thing, and that guy should be deselected, but it doesn't. So if you want to use the global time shift, deselect this guy. So now the issue is, what's going to happen here? I want to shift the right channel here over so that this peak lines up with that peak. And how much do I shift it over? And this is where things get just a touch confusing because of the terms they use for the time. The time values here generally are in milliseconds, although if you count this out, that's tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000. So it's in 10,000ths of a second rather than just thousands. Over here, we're dealing with that little funny symbol, which stands for microsecond, which is a millionth of a second. So how do you take this and turn that into microseconds, millionths of a second? Well, it takes a little bit of an effort. Let me just zoom in some more here. I'm going to right click and drag here. So we're just looking at that selection. Take these guys out of the way a little bit so we can see what's going on. If I were to look at these figures from there to there, I got tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000, hundreds, thousands now. If I were to take a look at that, it'd be nice if I could look down here and see what the duration is, but the duration only goes to milliseconds, so that's no help there. I can calculate that's about 1,700 thousandths of a second. Or, if you add another zero to that, it's 170 microseconds, 170 millionths of a second. So I'm going to move it to the right, 170 microseconds. And now I'm going to click apply and see if that works. But before I click apply, I need to make sure I deselect this, otherwise it'll only affect the selected area. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see it all when it's finally done. Let's see if I click on this guy and see if this thing shoves over 170 microseconds. Boom, there you go. Got it all lined up now. So that's the manual method to do the automatic phase correction. Okay, we got that. Yay! So this thing does at least tell you when things are not going well, but doesn't tell you how to fix it. Let's just check our work now and see if this little guy goes into the green line. Perfect. So we got that all fixed. Let's move on to amplitude statistics. Amplitude statistics do just that. They tell you how loud things are, the loudest passage kind of a thing, and you're kind of going, okay, I can pretty much see how loud things are. If I go over here and I press the backslash key and gosh, this is probably the loudest thing right there, or maybe, or right there. And so I can see that it's about -3 dBFS. And so why do I need this little amplitude statistics thing here? Well, you probably don't need it, but it's kind of an academic exercise. I'll click on scan, and that tells you, look at the peak amplitude is about -3 dB below full scale. Surprise, right? You already knew this. It tells you left and right channel, and it tells you the value of the samples, and the value of the samples depend on whether you're using 32-bit or 24-bit as to what the maximum values could be. But anyway, that's what they are in this file. These little buttons here let you go right to these places. So like the loudest peak, I click on that, and that's where it is, right there. I click on this one, right or left channel, same place. And then the thing's called RMS amplitude. Now what the heck is that? That's root mean squared, which is a statistical and analytical tool, and I'm not going to begin to explain what that's all about. So this is kind of a fun little exercise. You got a histogram that shows where most of your amplitude is, which is logical. It's toward something where you can hear it, and down here it's very, very quiet. So it makes sense that the histogram would look like that. But basically, this is just kind of a little way to look at how loud things are and then move on, I think. Okay, finally, let's look at frequency analysis. This is kind of fun, I think. I'm going to switch over to the Singer here. The frequency analysis lets you take a look at a file based upon its frequency analysis in terms of how loud the frequencies are, how loud the pitches are. Now, you could sort of do that in the spectral frequency display. This shows how loud things are in terms of this pitch here, about 275 hertz, is loud because it's bright yellow, and this area is not so loud. But this is sort of discrete. It's like one pitch area or one frequency area rather than sort of over a whole curve. This one gives you the whole curve look. So I'll click play. Switch back to the waveform view, and let's just play this guy and see what this looks like. How about that? Gives you this little picture. Now when I click pause or click stop, it takes the last view, and I can show you that the base end here is about 70, 80 below dBFS, below full scale. And here at about where her range would be, around 1000 hertz, as you can see that she's about 20 decibels below full scale, and that's kind of what you'd expect. And so now that you know this, what can you do with it? Well, not a whole lot. but you can at least see how changes you make will show up here. So I'm going to make a snapshot, which is kind of cool. You can click on these little buttons and that makes a snapshot of that moment. And I'm going to see how that moment compares to the same moment, or more or less the same moment, after I've changed things. So I'm going to go over to Effects, EQ, Filter and EQ, and pick the Parametric Equalizer, which is graphic as this is graphic. It's kind of helpful to have the two guys running side by side. You can see that the bass response here is kind of dropping off. So I can take the bass end of this thing and lift it up like that. You can see how the higher end, starting at about 1000K, kind of just gradually drops off. So here's 1000K. I'll take the number 3 point there and slide it over to about 1000K. There you go, right on there. And then I'm going to lift it up. So I'll take the H up and bring the 5 up a little bit like that, the 4 up a little bit. I can break the Q down to kind of straighten these guys out a little bit. Let's just do that. So now we've kind of compensated for this, not because we necessarily had to, but I want to show you this as kind of an exercise. And now we'll take a snapshot of that. Hard to find. Now you can see that the orange that we just lifted up here is now here. And then it's over here, it's above the red. So that just gives you a sense that, oh, okay, as I'm working on things and I make changes here, you can see the result of your changes over here by making these little snapshots and comparing things. But beyond that, I think it's more of just a little pleasure cruise down here in terms of having cool looking graphics, but I don't know that it's all that practical, but it is kind of fun to see the before and the after as you work on things like EQ with the frequency analysis tool open in front of you. So those are the 3 analytical tools here inside Audition. I think you can see that they're fun to play with a couple of times, but they really don't have all that much of a practical purpose.